Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Performance Talk. This is Yul Gordon. My partner Chris Costa won't be with us today, but we have an exciting guest, Dr. Eddie O'Connor. He's joining us today, and we're going to get right into it. Doc, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing right now.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Well, I'm a clinical and sports psychologist. I got started really wanting to specialize in the things that athletes suffered from the most. So I did a lot with chronic pain and injury. Did that for almost 20 years. And then moved much more into a specialty. Things kind of came into more of like performance anxiety. So I've done a lot with that. My current role is really building Success Stories community. It's an online platform for high performers who want to overcome their obstacles to excellence. And I take the approach to excellence of, rather than it being typically like the positive thinking and building confidence that we're all so familiar with and can be helpful, in my experience, I really found it's who can overcome the adversity the best, particularly the internal adversity of what are the thoughts and feelings that get in the way. So a lot of my work, both clinically but within the Success Stories community, is to teach people how to interact with those difficult thoughts and feelings differently so that they can pursue their values 100% with consistency and excellence.
Getting into that area as far as dealing with what you're feeling inside as far as anxiety goes, that's not something that people think athletes need to do. Why is it important? Everybody thinks athlete, gets hyped up and they're ready to go. They're going to run the marathon, make a great skateboard or snowboard run, be on time in the tennis match. But that's not always the case. They deal with a lot more anxiety than we might know.
It's because I think we think of anxiety as automatically pathological, and we have to stop doing that. We have to stop thinking of anxiety as a problem, because I don't know about you, but I'm anxious about something every day. I may not be having panic attacks or obsessive compulsive behaviors, but when we really bring it down, we have 4 basic human emotions: happy, sad, mad, and scared. And we experience all of them to some level all day. And if we are telling our athletes that they have to perform in the 25% of what it means to be human, in the most extenuating circumstances, under great pressure, when people are trying to beat the hell out of them, when only one person can win, it doesn't make sense if we treat anxiety as something that we have to get rid of or minimize. And the more time we actually spend, and I'm talking to the athletes, but I'm also talking to the coaches and the pros out here too in your own lives. If we're spending time fighting our anxiety, we don't have enough attention to focus on what we need to do at the same time. We have to find a way to make peace with it and bring it along with us.
And when are those times that anxiety might be appropriate or good?
That's a great question. I'll begin with the end and kind of say the way we want to relate to our anxiety is it working. And what I mean by that is, if I'm nervous before a competition, rather than immediately saying, well, then how do I calm down because that's the right thing, I have to say, well, why am I anxious? What is this anxiety trying to tell me? All of our emotions, even the unpleasant ones, have a good purpose. Like, our body isn't built to hurt us in these ways that we're suffering. So respect the anxiety. What's it trying to tell me? Well, am I prepared? Now, you'll find that most of the time our anxiety comes because we're not as prepared as we could be. So in the most helpful way, I would say, if you're anxious, look at your preparation and then turn around and do something. We always want to translate to action. Do something that will not necessarily reduce your anxiety, but will respect what it's trying to tell you and saying, hey, I got a big test tomorrow. I better study more. I've got a big competition. I better get to bed and get my rest. Or I've got this thing coming up in 2 months and I'm nervous about my performance there. Well, then let me do my drills every day and fix my nutrition and be my hydration. Let me prepare. And the anxiety can be the fuel that we need to be as intense as we have to be in order to win.
So, and sometimes I have to break it down to cartoon level, but basically is you're telling people to trust your training, but not only do that, make sure your training is appropriate enough to get you to a point where your anxiety becomes fuel instead of an anchor.
Yeah, let me slow it up. If you want the cartoon level, that's fun. Simply put, listen to every anxiety like it's a fire alarm. You would never run, I've been in hundreds of fire alarms, there's never been a fire. But that doesn't mean that if one goes off right now, I'm not going to pay attention to it because there's probably nothing.
Right.
So I teach my clients to respect their anxiety as a fire alarm and always lean into it. And sometimes there is a fire. And so then you need to, again, respect the anxiety and respond, but it always translates to doing something. So when you say trust the training, to me, if that's got this flavor of so that way you feel better, I want you to abandon the feeling objective. We're performers. It's all about performance. It's all about doing. So once you establish that, you ask this question, how does my anxiety influence my performance? What's it telling me to do? And you will almost always find that there's some insecurity that you have, and rather than brush it away and become confident, you should actually just prepare more in that. Or really look at it and settle into the fact and saying, I have actually given 100% and done everything. And then you find that it's just simply this false alarm or a fire drill that's going off. And then you can it'll still be annoying. So we would have to, if a fire alarm's going off, I'd have to double down and focus on you and talk louder and we'd have to hear more. Still annoying.
Right.
But if I'm running around trying to turn off this fire alarm, we can't have a good conversation. So I just need to let it be in the background, knowing that I'm safe because I've prepared. So think of your anxiety, if you want a quick fix, as a fire alarm in that way.
Okay. So I kind of bounce all over the place a little bit, but as we're, talking about how to deal with anxiety and everything, how did you get to this point? What made you want to focus in on this kind of stuff?
It's interesting. It happened by accident. I don't know if just because I'm good at it, but more and more, those are the clients that started showing up. So my assumption is that through word of mouth in my community and beyond, when people are anxious, they're like, oh, go see Dr. Eddie. So it wasn't through intention, but maybe it's also my passion for it because the more I've worked with it, the more I realize that it's an unnecessary barrier for most people. My athletes and other high performers just get so much benefit out of our first session when I show them and give them experiences about why they should be anxious and how normal it is. And once they stop feeling that they have this pathology, they're free to interact differently. So I think that's it, but I love it too because I like to be able to help people and then get results in 1, 2, 3 or more sessions. I like the quick fixes that these can be.
Right. In the professions of performance, we tend to think of almost everything pathologically.
Yeah, it's a problem.
If this, then this.
Yeah.
If that, then that. If you're not getting enough of this, then do this. So how do we make that correction as professionals in our own thinking with our clients?
This isn't going to be a cartoon level explanation, but
that's all right. We're talking to somebody else now.
Good timing for us to actually have this because I just presented on this at a workshop that got some great feedback at the Association for Applied Sports Psychology in Orlando here.
Okay.
And I actually addressed that whole thing that we really have a problem in psychology and in the medical model that everything is a pathology. If it's not right, something's broken. And the idea that all of our research is based on these scientific studies. We want evidence-based. But then when you take the average and reduce it and then have a protocol for that average based on the research, nobody's the average. That average person that the protocol is based on is not one single human being.
Right.
Because I'm not reduced to one diagnosis of depression or anxiety or low back strain or, I need to, improve my strength or this mobility limitation. Well, how does me being a diabetic come into it? How does me being 54 years old come into it? How does, my values come into it? How about my hit? We're just too complicated as the individual. So this is the reason that I go back to the variability of options that we could have. But the most important aspect of it, trying to reduce the hour presentation to 2 minutes, is that when we choose an intervention, how does it work for the individual? And if they're doing something that we think is quote unquote pathological, here's the biggest key. Why are they doing it? If you can, in any field you're in, identify what's reinforcing this. There's a reason that we're doing something that's unhelpful. And we just tell them to do something else, we're not going to actually break what's keeping it going. Let's take a simple example. You have an athlete who wants to be in better shape. Let's talk about nutrition. But they keep eating cookies and they don't stick to the diet. and it hurts them, and they're upset about it, and they don't want to eat the cookies because they really want to make this particular weight. Well, we could keep educating them about what to do it and hold on to your values, and this is the why. But if we don't understand what they're getting out of the cookie, we'll never be able to help. And they might even not know. They might say, I don't know, I just keep doing it. I've just got this impulse. I've got an addiction. I've got a sugar addiction, more pathologies. But once we can maybe understand that maybe they're an emotional eater, maybe they really do just value having those cookies, maybe their family is the one who has this habit and they've just got this whole tradition around, dessert at night and they bond and there's some social reinforcement. Until you can understand what's sustaining that behavior in the individual, we won't be able to help them. And so I think that is the mechanism of change, and where all of our fields as performance coaches can go, is how do we see the individual and what's the positive thing for that individual when they're doing something that's not positive.
We kind of had that discussion when it came down to movement and how athletes move and why. Mm-hmm. And we're still breaking that down on the biomechanics side as to, okay, this athlete moves this way, his body alignment is this way, and we don't think it's beneficial. But do we need to change it? And why?
I'll tell you, that's a perfect example. I'm working with this guy, Leonard Van Gelder, who has created the Human Rehabilitation Framework. Again, it's part of what I presented on. And I'll introduce him to you because you'll have he's a PT, brilliant, one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I went to him after learning this about some of my own aches and pains. And perfect example was, as I was running, I started to get into this old man shuffle. I'm like, oh, when did this happen? I can't lengthen my stride. And usually we'll just say, well, you've just gotten older. But I'm I see videos and I'm I don't know. I want to get back to sprinting, but my mobility was coming back. And then I was trying harder to remember the proper form for running, I've been running since high school. And so anyway, he had me doing this exercise of just walking around. He's like, what do you notice? I'm like, what do you mean, what do I notice? I'm walking. He's like, well, do you notice tension anywhere? And I was figuring, okay, I'm tense on the left side. He's like, no. I'm tense on the right side. And I wasn't aware of it, but I started to notice that there was this tension. And so he introduced, as you said, variability. When you run, get loose in this weird thing. So I loosened up. Long story short, 2 days later, I'm at the gym doing a CrossFit workout. We got tons of running in the middle of it. I'm tired, and I start to notice the tension that's showing up. And my first reaction is to follow the rule and hit the right running form. But what I was doing as a result of trying to hit that form was my arm, my leg, my knee, my ankle. I lost all the variability in the movement that I'd never noticed before. Which changed my form, which was causing my left knee pain. And all I started to do was introduce the fluidity. And within a couple of days of doing that, by allowing, like you said, to do it in a different way, my body loosened up. I stopped following the rules and the habits, and it was partially reinforced because I had to run with the right form. Same thing with my squats. I was having terrible knee pain, and in CrossFit you have this idea of the way that you need to squat in a certain positioning. But again, I'm not built like a 23-year-old elite athlete. My body moves very different. And so he gave me the permission to do different warm-up exercises and everything, which again allowed my body to move, to introduce variability. And then as a result, I was able to put the weights back on and get back into squatting. And again, the knee pain had gone away. And so I'll introduce you to him. He'll talk much more biologically and physically about that stuff, but we apply that same type of, what's the variance in the movement or the thinking patterns for psychologists? What's the selection, or why are we choosing that unworkable solution? Why will I choose a different way of moving? So in this case, for me, it was because, the immediate reinforcement of pain coming down. And then what's going to reinforce it? How do I keep this going and not slip back into the old patterns? Because we always have the choice. And if you hit those three elements, that's where I think our process-based therapies can really be dramatically different than what we're currently doing and be much more effective.
From a psychological side, where's this grounded? Is it grounded in CBT, straight behavior, or where's it grounded?
So, again, great scientific question. From psychology specifically, it starts, I guess I'd start off with this, acceptance and commitment therapy, or acceptance and commitment training, which is third wave behavior therapy, which kind of evolved out of CBT. And CBT's kind of gotten more into the habit of more mindfulness-based CBT, so there's much more overlap. And then the new science, very new, last few years really. In fact, a 2022 publication is a great book about this, of learning process-based therapy. So it kind of builds on that, and that's mostly of what I had spoken about. And the process-based therapy is built on the extended evolutionary meta model. And the idea is that in biology, if you ask somebody enough, why do people do that? And then they'll give an answer. Well, why do we do that? They'll give an answer. It always comes down to evolution. Like, evolution is like the science. And so this evolutionary model, this is where the idea of as a species or as a pattern of behavior, we have multiple things that we choose from. We select it for a particular reason. We then have that reinforced so that it becomes a pattern. And it always operates at one of three levels: the individual, or more of the sub within the individual, like immune system and all these things that go on, or the sociocultural level with the reinforces from culture and context. So
we get a lot of that.
So kind of complicated, but it's really finally something that really takes into the reality of what we are, and we bust out of the silos. And again, the protocols for diagnoses problem that we have that's so limited, because it works some of the time, but you know darn well it doesn't work all of the time, and a lot of people are being missed.
Well, I would say it probably works, and I'm cheating myself a little bit here, probably 4 out of 10 times.
Yeah, that's not a good ratio.
40% has never been good.
No.
You know,
it's a losing record.
We tend to lean on that a little bit, and we go back to what's comfortable, especially with the biomedical model, because it gives us a place to start. I don't know about you, but with my athletes, I try to get them to ask questions and start thinking about how they would like to do stuff when it comes to moving, when it comes to sprinting, when it comes to how they're training, because you can find out a lot from the individual athlete and making them part of the whole process, and then applying that back to them when you're programming and or counseling or advising or whatever. Your thoughts on something like that?
Oh, 100%. I learned early on in my career, I forget which colleague told me this, but it was brilliant. It's like, your clients are not going to remember what you say. They remember what they say. And so, you know, and it surprises me sometimes even too. I'll go through a session, I think I did a nice job, you know, okay, I know what the points that I wanted them to get. And I like to end by saying, what was most helpful for you? And they'll talk about some little detail that I had said that I didn't think was a big deal, but really because they know their individual context so well, said this is going to be really impactful. So then that directs my attention and focus, because as I think about selection and the reinforcements, what are they going to be more likely to do? Well, if it's coming from them, if it's their idea, we know from the motivational science that idea of autonomy is incredibly important for intrinsic motivation. Oh, yeah. And so I can help them figure it out. And I have the science, and I won't let them go in the wrong direction. I mean, we've got degrees. We know what we're talking about. Right. But when it comes from them and we ask the leading questions and they figure it out, they hold on to it a lot more, because they've been lectured to their entire life. And with all the information that's out there, it's overload. My brain is fried half the time. But when they can actually feel it and walk through it, and then we reinforce what's right, ask the right question to move in a different direction, and they discover it. When you had talked about, like, what do you notice? This is key in the work that I do and what's in the human rehabilitation framework, is the noticing. They knew this in the Olympics, quadrennials ago. I remember one year that I was in a workshop, and they were like, I think the theme for the Olympics was nothing happens without awareness. Yeah. We got to slow down on that. And when we ask those questions, we again get to see the individual. And so I love, long answer or long response, but I love your approach there, because now you're truly partnering with your client.
Well, one of the things that, that I did, and full disclosure, Doc, I'm about as old as Methuselah. but one of the things that I did way back in the day, there was no such thing as exercise science. So I took everything that had to do with the body, and then I bumped into psychological processes in like 98, 99. Started thinking about that. And again, full disclosure that I don't do on the podcast very much. So now my doctorate's in psychology. So when I started that, I said, how do I apply this? Because I'm new to this whole world. I've been on the physical side of everything. So we started saying, to our clients or to our staff, to say to our clients or ask them, how do you feel? What do you think? Why do you think that's important? And those kind of things. And, we've gotten a lot more out of that than just saying, okay, what's your problem?
Yeah. Man, I love that. And here's one thing how I think psychology and biology or the physical sciences can overlap the most and where we're doing the most damage. And there's a lot of research out on this, so you can look it up, about what's the language that physical therapists and doctors are using. In fact, there's a study done in chronic pain. I think 131 chronic pain patients felt that their problem was immutable. It was negative. It was very complex. It wasn't going to go away. And they were asked, where did you learn this from? 89% said they got that from their healthcare professionals. They got those opinions from their healthcare professionals. So it's the language that we're using. I know when I worked with chronic pain, another beautiful example, I had patients who were so much into stress, and they're like, I have degenerative disc disease. Do you know what degenerative disc disease is? It means you're getting older. It means that your disc, from the moment you're born, maybe I might be wrong about the moment you're born, but certainly by your teenage years, as things go on, things degenerate. Like that's not a diagnosis necessarily, but the way that they take it.
Learn to walk and stand upright, you start degenerating.
Thank you.
It's just you're degenerating slower when you're younger.
Yeah.
So you grow.
And how many times do your clients in physical therapy, kind of feel like they say that my knee is unstable, or we use those words, or I've got a slipped disc, and they've got these pictures of a disc in their back like swishing around. And so the language that we use can really, even if it's technically diagnostically correct in the medical circles, it's having a very negative impact on our clients. I was going in for stretching, and every time I'd go in, they'd be like, wow, you're really tight today. Like, why? I thought I was feeling loose. I was feeling good today. But now, here's another study they just learned, last one, and then I'll stop. But
no, go ahead.
The feedback that we get from like the Oura rings and things like that, they did a study and found that these athletes, when they got 5 hours of sleep and then they were told, they didn't get the feedback directly, they were told the feedback told them that they got 8 hours, but they only got 5, they performed really well. And the athletes who got 8 hours of sleep, but were told they only got 5, had poor performances.
I was always curious about that, and sleep and rest. We believe that, preparation, nutrition, and rest are the three pillars of performance.
Absolutely.
All those things in preparation are big. But over here in rest and nutrition, if I tell you that what you're eating is bad, you're not going to feel real good about what happened.
Right.
On the field or on the court. But like you said in that example, if you tell somebody, you only got 5 hours rest or 5 hours good rest when they really got 8 and vice versa, what are we doing at that point?
Well, what really it illustrates is, of course, the biology matters. Of course, those pillars matter.
Yes.
And what matters equally with it in order to maximize that effect is the way that we talk about it and the beliefs that we have. Because we could tell an athlete that, for example, that it's stable. I work with a lot of athletes coming back from injury, and they'll get maybe good medical suggestions that, hey, you're healthy, it's good, you're good to go. But they haven't believed it. And that's where the individualization comes in. If they don't believe it and they've got another thought that they're attaching to, then it actually doesn't matter how stable or unstable their knee is, because they're going to interact with it as if it's unstable and have all the complications of it, despite the biological reality. So we have to, at best, work together with psychology and medical professionals, or can we truly start to integrate the training of both so we can understand both sides? And as psychologists, part of my mission too is to work with medical groups and things of that nature. I'm working with a bunch of athletic trainers here in West Michigan to teach them all of this stuff so that they can actually talk to their athletes differently. And the results have been amazing. And they can't even believe it, that just by changing a word or two here, how the athletes have then, as you said it earlier, will run with this information and be well. Because we're empowering them.
Right. And then with that empowerment comes the types of progressions I think we're looking for.
Yes.
How many times, and I know you have a few times, you've seen an athlete with an ACL injury, and they just weren't comfortable coming out of the brace. But the coach and the doctor said, "Oh, the knee's great. You need to go ahead and take the brace off, and you'll get used to it." What I said to the coach and the doctor, I said, let them run out of the brace. Let them put that brace on as long as they think they need to have it. And when they think it becomes a detractor, they'll take it off. I said, I feel like our job is to not let them take it off too early, as opposed to, not letting them keep it on if it made them feel comfortable.
I can certainly see the value in that if we continue to look at them as individuals, because I can certainly see a number of athletes where that's absolutely the case. But I also have a client that I remember, high-level elite bowler, who was wearing a brace on the knee. And the brace, even though it was told that she could take it off, many months ahead of time, the brace was actually reinforcing that she had to protect her knee, and it totally affected her bowling skill.
What she was doing?
Yeah. And it wasn't the brace itself that was restrictive. It was that the brace was reminding her that she had an injury before and she needs to be careful. And she could never get back to the form because of that. And so we had a conversation, and I was like, is it healed? And we built on those like step by step. Well, if this, then that. If this, then that. And
Sure.
She was realizing that she was really wearing it out of fear, an emotional reason, as opposed to out of an actual need. And so when she took off her brace, she was nervous the first couple times, but within a week, was then able to get back to the proper form and improve her delivery on her scores. And it was all about getting rid of that brace.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's got to be an individual thing.
And she had to feel safe. That's the other thing, is that our athletes have to feel safe. If they're not, then they're not going to move and change. So it really came...
And I think that was my point to those two professionals.
Right.
She doesn't feel safe.
Right. And in that case, that would work.
If she doesn't feel safe, then let's keep her feeling safe. But like you said, encourage her during training. Okay, let's take the brace off for a few frames.
There you go.
Let's do this. Let's do that, and see if we can't help her back to a level of comfort psychologically that matches what she is physically.
Mm-hmm. Because
until that happens, really, we both know that if the athlete's not comfortable, the performance is going to still suffer.
Mm-hmm.
So we can. I like. I like where we're going with that, or where we went with that. I have another little bit of a question.
Yeah.
And a little bit of a statement. I find a lot of times that as we bring in younger professionals in the fields of performance, all of them, psychology, physical therapy, sports medicine, when we bring them in, we're not giving them enough of what am I trying to say? Enough of the whole picture. We're giving them the fire hose of what it is that they do, but nothing of how it fits with psychology, how it fits with nutrition, how it fits with injury and recovery, and those kind of things. Your thoughts?
Well, the older I get too, the more I realize I don't know everything. Like the more I learn, the less I know. And I had explained that, like when I was really confident knowing this much, right? Because I was only, I knew a lot, but I only knew this much. If this is the field of, like if the knowledge is infinite, I'm only in touch with this circle of what I know with only this. Now that I know this much, I'm in touch with a whole lot more that I don't know. And
right.
The more I know, the more I realize there's stuff out there. So without criticizing graduate programs and things of that nature, like there's a lot to learn. I would encourage humility that I didn't have, honestly, when I got out. I was like, I got my degree, I'm ready to roll, let me do and let me help people, because I was highly trained and I knew what I was doing. But I needed to be more humble, and I needed to continue to seek out mentorship, and I needed to continue to be curious. And that's what I would suggest. I mean, I'm now this much later in my career and talking to a lot of people at this stage of career as well. Like, we're enjoying these new areas of performance, whether it's a new population or a shift in what we're doing. Almost everybody's having this sort of mid-career transition because we
Right.
did things well, but now we realize there's new things that we could be excited about and learn. So as the young professionals, I would say, yes, like, be proud and be confident in what you've learned, but remain curious and really surround yourself in your environment of work with people that you can learn from. And it doesn't undermine who you are and what you've done, but it'll just make you better. It's sort of like, if we want to all help people to achieve their excellence, that's where ours has to come from as well too. So I guess that's my feedback is, take this podcast, like, thank you for putting this out. This is what you're doing and contributing to that. This counts. So continue to be curious and grow, and it will serve our clients much better that way with that humility.
Well, with that said, one of the reasons I did start this podcast is, boy, I hate to date myself, but back in 2010, maybe 2009, I started feeling like, okay, I'm still learning, but I'm at this stage in my career that I feel like I have something to give back.
Sure.
So how do I want to do it? I didn't want to teach at the time, which is what I'm doing now. But at that time, I still wanted to, I can still be out on the field or in the weight room or, or help in these ways. But it started to feel more like, you're sitting here, you're still learning this stuff, but now you have something to give as well. So what do you do? So that's how we got here.
Yeah, perfect.
With that said, and continuing down that kind of mentorship thought process, we all think in the beginning mentorship is important to get that first job, to get in a place where we can do something we want to do. Why is mentorship today still important for mid and late career professionals, and just as important to continue learning?
I think the idea when we talk about mentorship is the idea that whatever stage we're at, no matter how old we get, we're getting into a new stage. So, as mid-career professionals, we've got a different family life. We have maybe more or less energy as a result of both our health and demands. As we get older, here's the best story of mentorship that I had heard. There's a guy, I think he's in his 80s, and he was still being mentored by somebody who is, he was in his 70s, he was being mentored by somebody who was in his late 80s. And the guy, passed away. And the younger mentor in his 70s was saying, he taught me how to end my last days. Like, I was understanding what it's going to be like in the end of days and how to die. It's like this man poured into me about every stage of life. He'd been his mentor for about 40 years. But he was always ahead of me, 2-3 steps ahead of me, letting me know what's coming, letting me know how he's handling it, what his mistakes were. So there are stages of our life in our 30s, which is different than our 40s, different than our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, death.
Wow.
And the other idea, though, is I'll see a lot of this is people always looking out to get a mentor and what's kind of like so that they're poured into. But, people, don't always do it for free. You might pay for it. You might get a group. But then mentor somebody younger than you. Like, give that away.
Yeah.
So that, this system can work. Because if we're just looking to get mentored and we're not thinking about who we can pour into, then the system's out of balance. So if we can develop that culture where we all respect it and understand it, have somebody pouring into you, find somebody older and ahead of you, but then find somebody younger than you and pour into them.
Yeah, that's a great response, a great statement. It's always amazing to me when you start doing that and you're pouring into somebody younger than you, somebody in a different place than you are, how much you get out of it. You know, I stand there, I sit there sometime and say, wow, I just went through that hour with that young man or young woman, and I learned so much.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I hope I taught them something, you know. hope they got something out of that they could use. But, you know, when they walked away, they were like, thank you, you know, whatever. And I was like, wow, you know, this, I think we learn at different stages that pouring back into someone does help you out. You know what I mean? It gives you something that I think you can't get anywhere else.
Yeah.
We were built to serve. That's what I think human beings were. That's just my thought and the way I was taught. So moving on. So we're back to psychology and how it works for athletes and so forth. And you brought it up a little bit earlier, but let's talk a little bit more about injury.
Mm-hmm.
Athlete suffers what 15 years ago might have been a career-ending injury. Now they're coming back from them. How does the psychological part help with that?
I mean, it's critical. Usually the first step that I will do with my injured athletes is I'm curious about their relationship and their trust and their ability to ask questions to their medical providers. It's been surprising to me how much athletes are holding on to questions themselves. They don't want to bother the doctors. They're really busy. So the first thing I usually do is I try to find out, because I can't answer a lot of those questions. If they're concerned about their healing status, for example, I'm like, well, what does the doc say? And they're like, well, he said I was fine. I'm like, well, what did he say specifically? Why are you fine? And I teach them how to dive in to get the proof that they need, not just, you know, to be able to trust the doc. And if they do trust, then it works, that's fine. But if they don't know and they want to know and more, I teach them, here are the questions that you need to ask so that either, you know, the doctor, the surgeon, the athletic trainer, the PT that you really trust, who do you trust the most to give you the answers to these? And that's usually one of the first biggest hurdles and biggest jumps that my injured athletes will make. The second biggest one is, you know, there's a lot of stuff in between, but then when they're ready to return to play, I get one of two reactions. Either people are going so fast because they want to get back and they're not paying attention to their body, or they're paying too much attention to their body and they're afraid to go back and they don't want to get re-injured. So in that same way, you know, throughout that process, it's a matter of really kind of saying, hey, you're still looking at the future, or, you know, where you used to be or where you should be or where you want to go. Let's continue to kind of work in the present moment here. And usually physical therapists and trainers can be really good about this, about let's have that stepwise approach. If you're here now, here's your next step. Take that athletic identity you've had. I like to say that, first of all, injury is not time off. It's not, you're not done with the season. Your training does respectfully look very different, but you take that athletic identity and the way that you would attack practice and the way you're disciplined and the way you show up every day, and you do that in your rehab. Attack your rehab like an athlete. Don't change who you are. It's just a different sport. Rehab now is your sport. And if you can approach it in that same way, assuming you're a successful athlete, if you can approach it with that same attitude, and they're like, oh yeah, but you know, I used to bench 350 pounds and now they got me pulling on these rubber bands. I'm like, yes, and I know it's different, and I respect that. I'm not going to argue with you. But that's where you're at today because you just had reconstructive surgery. And you want to get back to that benching, so you will be able to do that. But these are the workouts today, because are they hard? Well, yeah. Are you tired? Yeah. Do you go to failure? Yeah. There you go. Attack it like an athlete. And that's the process that I'll usually use to go through.
Okay. Well, that is, I'm sitting here as you're talking, I'm thinking about the number of, you know, clients, you know, I've worked with, and those with, you know, some pretty significant injuries. And that's exactly where they were. Well, you know, these rubber bands, you know,
It's stupid.
Geez, yeah. Geez, coach, I'm 6'3", 245. What am I doing with little rubber bands? Trying to get better.
Yeah.
And when you kind of challenge them to be the athlete they are a little bit, I can see why that would, have a positive effect.
And going back to our first concept of individualization, though, right? Look at the athlete in front of you, because some of them will do well with a kick in the ass. Like, come on, man, like, buck up. This guy's a defensive end and everything's hard. So, you can encourage him.
Right.
But then maybe, again, could also be a defensive end, but maybe they don't respond to that. They're tired of being told what to do. And so you do it with your strategy that you said earlier about asking questions and say, hey, man,
right.
I really respect that, you'd rather be on the field taking care of your teammates. And you're in here with me. I'm sorry about that. That hurts, right? Let's give them a space to feel frustrated. And then once they feel seen and heard, then we can ask, so what do you want to do about it? And they'll be like, I want to get back on the field. Okay, I can help you do that. What do you think you need to do in order to get back on the field? And then they're going to put their head down and be like, pull on this damn rubber band. And then they'll say it. Yeah, but if we give them
exactly
space,
what they'll say.
The space, because that's the right answer, and they know it. But you by being seen and heard and feeling safe, as we said earlier, and creating this space for them to be upset and to be depressed and to be anxious, coming full circle in our interview, by creating that safe space where this is normal, it's healthy, bring those feelings along with you. Use them as motivation. That sadness that you have about not being on the field can fuel, and it's hard, but it can fuel their desire to get better. I don't like feeling this sad. I miss my teammates. I want to be out there. That's who I am. Yeah, man.
Yeah,
Let's get you back there.
That camaraderie and that shared objective, that means a lot.
Yeah.
And it means a lot, when they're taken away from it, and hopefully we can use that to get them to do the work they need to do to get back to it.
And you'll hear in the way that we were talking too, notice that as depressed and anxious as they might be, we're not pathologizing, we're normalizing, and we're creating space. And that removes that camaraderie, as you talked about, that walking alongside them where they are, releases so much extra distress, because they're anxious about being anxious and they're depressed about being depressed.
Right. And when they're told to go see the doc, they don't want to see you anyway. Initially.
Yeah.
So go over there and see, why do I have to do this? I mean, I was a college athlete, suffered some injuries, and I hated it. Yeah. But, you learn and you go. So we've talked about a nice little group of things, but I'm going to direct us a word about that time in the interview where I have to start looking at the future. So here's the question for the next 8-10 minutes. What does the future need to be in performance/sports psychology? And how does it need to fit with the rest of the performance world? The future.
The future, yeah. Well, I think we really set it up so this can be a shorter answer, but re-listen to the entire podcast and apply what we just talked about. But to summarize it, if you're looking at the literature and you're doing some continuing ed, I encourage people to move into the process-based therapies. And that's written by some psychologists, but it's written as a trans-theoretical model that, and it can get applied into. And again, the book is called Learning Process-Based Therapy, and there's podcasts by like Stephen Hayes. That's going to change the way you think about clients. And you're going to listen to the science, brilliant people who put this together. And it all comes from science. Like they did this Death Star study as a quick example. Almost 55,000 studies were reviewed over this multi-year period. And they found that the greatest moderator of change in therapeutic change is psychological flexibility, which is the ACT model. And when you add mindfulness to it, mindfulness-based therapies, it accounted for over 55% of the moderators of change. So everybody, like we've got science now that backs this up, that says this is it, more than therapeutic alliance, more than self-compassion, more than like all these other things, which still work and they account for some of it. But when you can hit 55% in your approach. You really want to get educated in that.
Right.
And then, as I'm excited working with Leonard, the human rehabilitation framework takes all of that information and then adds the rehabilitation principles onto that. And maybe we can have some links, but there's a course that he and I had put together about ACT within the human rehabilitation framework, and then he's starting the certification through dynamic principles. All these courses that you can do it. So we'll leave some links for some information about that there.
Okay.
But that training is out there, and that's where the field is going. Thank goodness that's where it's going, because we're correcting the mistakes that we've seen are happening. And that 40% that you had said, it's like we need to get that percentage up. And we can only do that if we see the individual in front of us and start to move away from these protocols for diagnoses framework.
Right. The one size fits the masses process.
Right.
And while protocols can sometimes get you to a certain level, at some point you have to go to an individual basis,
right,
in order to work. I know in the armed services and as a vet, you walk in the door, they're treating 180 people and and everybody get treated, all 180 of you, for being in an explosion. And then you're going to get triaged and narrowed down to the individual. Narrowed down. Get this first. We're going to check you for a concussion. We're going to check you for some damage to your auditory system. We talked we mentioned a little bit about the future, which was kind of wrapping up what we've been talking about. But so we are now. Mm-hmm. What else is right now that you think we need to pay attention to?
Well, I'll get on my platform. And this is what I do in my Success Stories community. It's an online platform that I have, and I encourage y'all, actually, while it's there for performers to get better, feel free as a professional to kind of come in and kind of learn all the strategies that I'm doing with these individual athletes, and the exercises and the worksheets, etc. So this is an open community to if you want to get better and overcome these obstacles. And I would say that where my big preaching often comes into is that I don't believe in positive thinking and confidence, and that ruffles a lot of feathers. And then the reason for it is because there are times, let's take injury, where you shouldn't be confident. Am I supposed to be,
right?
Should I be telling these athletes to go to the Olympics and believe that they can win and beat everybody in the world? It doesn't make sense. So this normalization, this acceptance is really a big, big part of it. So learning people how to unhook is the skill that I like to teach the most. It's not a matter of taking negative thinking and making it positive. You've been in the gym.
Yeah.
Right? Being kind.
Exactly.
And showing self-compassion, while that's a great intervention, doing that there in that moment is not going to get me to the intensity that I need to. It's not workable. So again, I teach my clients, and I would encourage professionals out there to teach your clients, your athletes, your high performers, the workability of my thoughts and feelings. And how do I learn to assess that? How do I learn to unhook when it's not helpful? That's a skill. And then get myself back in the present moment, attach to my values, and take committed action towards those. It's that formula. That's the psychological flexibility that showed up in the Death Star study. It's that formula that I teach in Success Stories community, and that's the one that I think is going to raise everybody's level of performance, from coaches and people who want to get their best health, to the athletes that we're working with, and everybody else in between.
As we start to wind down here, because I'm at that spot, I got to keep looking at the clock. I don't want to make a little production folks mad by going over time.
Yeah.
Because I'll get a bad note. But as we continue to look at things in the performance world, and when I say things, I mean clients, people, and the professionals that serve those people. How can we, as professionals, along with some of the things you've mentioned, get together on a terminology that is suitable to communicate across professional lines? What do we need to do that?
Well, there's a lot of levels that I could respond to this one on. Like, in one sense, it's impossible. Like, so let's respect that that's the case. Like, I'm not going to be able to talk to a neurosurgeon and understand what he's talking about.
Right.
But I think that that word of humility kind of comes in, that word of curiosity that we talked about earlier. So I'll give an example of how Leonard and I work together. Again, he's physiologically brilliant, and I am amazed at how he understands psychology. And so as we work together, I can see the excitement that we both have because we have a respect for our mutual fields and how advanced we are in each field. And so I'm listening more, and I'm just like, I tell him, okay, give me a week and I got to process what you had said. But then I'm excited to go down and dig in and look up the words and understand what he's saying. And I'm smarter as a result of talking to him. And he'll always be ahead of me in that way, but he's also patient and he gets excited to teach it. And then vice versa, when he's like this and I get to clarify about, acceptance or diffusion or this or that, and he's curious to learn and to grow. So we still can't speak as equals in our fields, but we are having more and more overlap the more time we spend together because we're humble. And that sounds weird. Look how humble I am. See how it's like the opposite of it. But I embrace
with that
it.
Humility,
Yeah.
It opens you up to understand.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's the curiosity. It's the idea that I no longer, like I had to when I first graduated, be the smartest guy in the room. I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room anymore. Like, that was great for my ego, but I didn't learn a damn thing being the smartest guy in the room. So I put it that way.
I mean, I know exactly where you're coming from as coming from two fields as a younger guy and then going into this, field, or being in this field a long time, but as an athlete, as a soldier, as a leader, and then as a coach, I've been in a life of alpha males.
Yeah.
You got to be the biggest, you got to be the strongest, you got to be the smartest. And it took me a long time to figure out that at the very least, you want some smarter people in the room than you are.
Yeah.
At the very least.
Yeah.
So, well, listen, this has been a great conversation, and I know we could probably keep this one going for a while. And don't want to start a new topic, but I want to, throw the door open to you for any last words, and ask you, if you'll send us some of those links and those things. And we'll put in the show notes so when this one drops, the community out there will have them. Your website and those kind of things.
Yeah, thank you. It's like I'm really excited about this stage of my career. If anything that I have said has been helpful to you, I would encourage you to go to the Success Stories community, or I'll drop the link to Dynamic Principles, which is more of the human rehabilitation framework with the injury. And both of those are going to kind of involve somewhat of the process-based therapy. So if you like it, I just highlight that those are the two things for more resources if we've piqued your interest. And I would love to partner with you and walk alongside you and help you become your best, overcoming your obstacles as well. So thank you for that opportunity.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Joel Gordon. This has been Performance Talk. Our distinguished guest today has been Dr. Eddie O'Connor. Eddie, I appreciate you taking the time and speaking with us today, but more importantly, over the last month, I really appreciate your understanding as I had to bump my head on a couple things, and then with our lost loved one, and then just getting back to trying to have a regular day, which we all know is impossible after something like that. But I appreciate your understanding and ending up with us here today. And we're looking forward to talking to you some more in the future.
It's great to be here. Many thanks.